Hello and welcome everybody to the Michael Chekhov Masters Talk about the creative process. I'm Lisa Dalton and I am from the National Michael Chekhov Association, and my guest, my co-host is
Joerg Andrees. I'm Joerg Andrees from the Michael Chekhov International Academy based in Berlin in Germany. And yeah, I like very much to have this chat with Lisa through the air, over the ocean and around the world. That's wonderful. And we have also another guest with us, and this is Ophir.
Hello everyone, Ophir from Israel. Looking forward for this talk.
Our topic today is the creative process, and in that there are a multitude of concepts that Mr. Chekhov shares in various places. And before we go into Mr. Chekhov, I wanted to just bring up, because I thought it was interesting to talk about the concept of the creative processes and what they are considered by a certain standard. Back in 1926, Graham Wallas, who founded the London School of Economics, published a book where he spoke about the 4 stages of the creative process. And in that book and his work has become a model across many institutions, and for many psychologists and scientists interested in the creative process across all genre, whether it's creating for inventors, for artists, for business people, etc. And those 4 stages are, the first stage is the preparation, and the preparation is a conscious process where you go about collecting, or as we might gesture, gathering potential resources for you. And it's distinguished in that it is an active and conscious process. And then and as a conscious process, it can also follow a procedure. So I'm interested in trying to collect information, so I'm going to research the definitions, I'm going to go through a list, I'm going to check with previous experts, I'm going to read books. You could create a list, a procedure of how to prepare. And in this process, your subconscious is beginning to collect all the potential sources of inspiration. And then you move into what he calls the incubation stage. And it's also known as combinatory play, combining different elements of what you've collected. And if you think of it as a train, in the first phase 1 of preparation, you sort of load the boxcars onto a train. In this, you have boxcars in many different locations. In this second phase, you start figuring out, do I want this boxcar to be number 1, and this one to be number 2, and that to be number 3, or maybe this should be number 1, maybe number 2 should be number 3. You start combining and putting all the pieces together in different forms, different structures. And during this process, this phase 2, is what is suggested as an unconscious process. So this work of assembling the pieces happens unconsciously and is best done when you're gardening, taking a walk, and or if you want to speed the process up, by beginning a creative process in another area. Like start working on a different problem, a different task, while that first one is incubating, as they say. And then the next phase, 3, is called illumination. So following your preparation and the incubation, preparation being conscious, incubation being unconscious or subconscious or superconscious. The inspiration is a moment, it's a fleeting moment. It's called the aha moment. And it comes as a result of the first 2. Preparation feeds the incubation. The incubation, when you get the train or all the puzzle pieces in the perfect order, something clicks. It's an aha. And you come to a certain clarity of vision in that inspiring moment. And then the 4th stage is called verification. And in some cases, it's split into 2 phases, 4 and 5. But in verification, well, if it's as 1, you begin to test to see if your aha moment is true, is good, and then you put it into application. So you start applying it, you start rehearsing with it, so to speak. You start practicing, testing it, and bringing it through. And that 4th stage is a conscious stage. So it goes from stage 1, conscious, stage 2, incubation, and stage 3, inspiration, are both unconscious or superconscious. And stage 4 is back to a conscious process. And these processes overlap and interweave. And you may be in phase 1 on one aspect of the work while you're in phase 3 of another aspect. So I thought that was interesting, just to give us a context outside of what Michael Chekhov was bringing, and perhaps consider in the different areas where he speaks of the creative process, what those or how those, or whether those 4 stages from Graham Wallace intersect with Michael Chekhov's work on the creative process. And so just before I turn it over to Joerg to share some thoughts, I am posing the question for us to think about, why do we even want a creative process? So what happens if we have no creative process? What is the value of knowing about a creative process? So just to think that the reason we're having this discussion is because there's probably some very good reasons why. Joerg, would you like to take it anywhere you want from there?
Of course, I will not this question answer now. No, let's see how we can answer the question after all the sessions, or bit by bit through that. It is nice, thank you, Lisa, for taking something from the outside to that theme of the creativity or the inspiration or whatever you will call it. And it's maybe sometimes helpful. On the other hand, we see when we come to some scientific explorations, they have in this way a different structure as Chekhov suggested, his structure. And his structure is a kind of very nicely to read when you read that the 4 stages of the creative process. He gives the 4 stages, but he says even all these 4 stages are simultaneously also happening. So 4 stages, but not staircase, 1 step, 2nd, 3rd, and then you reach the heaven of art. It's just do 1 step, and with this 1 step you will also do or meet something what you can do with another step. And for that, it's of course very interesting to see how he tried to describe it from which point of view. And I tried go also to see how it is into the actor described. Now we speak about the 4 stages of the creative process on the technique of acting. There's a wonderful chapter in it. And when we go to the actor, I have here this blue version. There is how to approach the part. And this is again different structured, how he tried to give a suggestion to the actor or to the acting artists. To the actor, he speaks, from my understanding, more that he could alone have to do some work. And he says, oh yeah, you can start with that, you can start with that, you can start with that. And in the background, the same background in the 4 stages, he has that each step anybody would like to start with to approach a part would lead even to the others. Chekhov has generally the understanding that everything is weaved with each other together, and from one tool or from one skill you come also to the other. And so he gives there to the actor 5 basic suggestions where you could start when you have a part, and then he speaks more about Stanislavski and this theme of objective and super objective. What is very nicely to study also in this direction, and this may lead us also to the understanding of that. Sorry, I should have this book now. In our time came and in England one director with this topic that the objective is or should be always the starting point for any acting. So there is another connection to that. Maybe I bring that book in the next meeting with me for that, because it's interesting to see in which directions one can start to think about that theme. And in this, on the technique of acting, he tries to create the 4 stages. And in these 4 stages, I have, maybe I can say that here now also. He comes in one of the stages, he is mentioning also Steiner, and Steiner with this book, Speech and Drama. And interesting is that this, how he described these 4 steps. This has very much to do, as Steiner is even describing steps of meditation. And even in the steps of meditation, Steiner describes, he says then, okay, they are, you start with one, but with one you reach also something of the other. And you have to go through that to come to a higher stage of consciousness. And with these 4 stages of the creative process, Chekhov ends with the inspiration, with a higher ego again, with a creative individuality, so that we, in the stages of the creative process, we would like to reach the state of an inspired performance. And this inspired performance in these 4 stages of the creative process, he names then in the end with a divided consciousness. Again, this chapter, the point through the work, the creative individuality can break through the limitations of the fixing or in the body and the fixing in these circumstances, and becomes inspired, And then there is a state of inspiration that one is in this, with this divided consciousness, one can observe oneself in the process. And this is interesting that also Steiner describes very much in the speech and drama, that this is what the actor at least should reach as a creative state for herself, for himself, in this trying to find the way how one with a creativity and through the processes, through the technical process can reach this state. I can see myself, you understand? See myself in the process, even from outside, comes to that relationship. So that was, again, interesting for me to see this when I started to look at it in a fresh way, to see the, what is the English word? the weaving of the 4 stages. They are one thing, but one has to start somewhere. And so then we come to the point that it has to, again, to do with this transformation to reach this, to reach this divided consciousness, a higher state of consciousness with a creative individuality. And last bit for that, because in our first 4 chattings about that, it was interesting, the higher ego and creative individuality, and what is what in which what is the right term for which aspect of that. And then there were 4 aspects of the higher ego, and one was a creative individuality. Chekhov speaks also here very flexible and flexible terms, not in definitions, not in a formula. And he tries to describe this out of the situation, which aspect of that creative work is connected with the higher ego. And this is through all the 4 steps.
Right off the bat, one of my favorite processes of preparing is using the reversal process and starting at the end. And so as you were speaking about, you went straight to inspiration, the heavenly point of our existence as artists, and the sense of objectivity. So one of the opportunities that we have that Chekhov suggests is to cultivate actively on a daily basis this sense of objectivity by seeking to engage our divided consciousness in everyday activity. So the more we can look at, for example, how we're interacting. If I'm gardening, can I step outside myself and watch myself garden? Can I look from the plant's point of view at me? Can I work with my imagination to engage in practicing this stage of divided consciousness? And one reason is that Chekhov suggests that there are 2 reasons why we fail to attain inspiration, 2 primary problems or challenges, you could say, that exist that block inspiration from coming through. And one is an undeveloped body, and the other is inhibitions. Well, there could be many different inhibitions, but the fundamental concept that inhibitions and undeveloped bodies are what interfere with inspiration coming into us and being radiated through us, because either we receive the inspiration and our undeveloped body is incapable of conveying it or radiating it, sending it, expressing it, revealing it, or we have inhibitions inside of us which block us from hearing, sensing, feeling, receiving the inspiration, or allowing that as inspiration. And so that's just one practical process that you can engage now, is practicing divided consciousness, because one of the inhibitions that we often meet in the artist is the shock that happens when this inspiration occurs. And when we experience divided consciousness, we get so surprised by it that we actually fall out of it. And so by practicing consciously to develop a comfort level with divided consciousness, we can help soften or transform that inhibition around having divided consciousness. And part of that is an awareness that the feelings of the artist are separate from the actors, from the character's feelings. So what the actor is feeling and what the character is feeling are two separate events. And if a person is operating, and if an actor is operating out of the concept that I have to feel what my character is feeling, then they cannot simultaneously attain the objectivity, which is free of that personal feeling. So for many years, the predominant actor training methods have asked us to feel what the character feels, and freeing ourselves from that, which is part of developing, and is part of, it would go back to that preparation stage of collecting resources. And one of the resources, preparing yourself, you're developing your body and transforming inhibitions so that the state of inspiration can be received. So one of the, Steiner does have a wonderful quote that I wanted to read, which is, "Nothing must remain in the artistically beautiful upon which the artist has not impressed his spirit." I'll read that one more time. "Nothing must remain in the artistically beautiful upon which the artist has not impressed his spirit." So it's like art is spirit given form, and anything that is not coming through that higher ego and impressing its creative individuality on your expression is something that we can leave behind. We want every part of what we bring to our creations to have our creative spirit impressed upon it. And that objectivity is one of the central ways of allowing total freedom to permeate how we express. Joerg, do you have something you want to share there?
Yeah. On one hand, I got a question. I will wait with this question to you.
Okay.
On the other side, it is very much connected with that, what we touch sometimes, or many times in our time when we work. I don't know how it is for you, but when I meet the people who come to the workshops or to the work to prepare something, a part or a scene or anything, there is this personal, little shaky unsureness very easily to sense. And some also express it. They feel not sure, is that what they are doing right? Or how can I find the right thing for that, what I got here as a part to prepare. And so this is a kind of a deeper psychological point. And interesting in this 4 stages, he speaks also about that point. The actor should never worry about his talent, but rather about his lack of technique, his lack of training. It sounds a little bit, oh yeah, you have to do it, it's a morality, something. But it's so interesting through that training of the tools, one learned to trust oneself. Because I'm I'm searching in the training for something. I don't do mechanically training. I'm searching for something in each training element. I try to explore. And in this moment, when I try to explore, I start to open up to my creative ego. I want to find something, and I can't find it through rational thinking, through rational, logical tasks. So, and this is one bit what I think has to do with that what you spoke about. And interesting, he speaks about this problem at the 4th stage. But it starts in the very first beginning. It starts in the very first beginning with the first stage. That is a kind of, I don't know how you feel it, how do you do that when you would like to open up to your higher ego. I think it doesn't work in the way, oh, I want to open up to my higher ego, I want to open to higher ego, I want to open up. Where are you? Come, please. Okay, I drink a whiskey. Higher ego, would you like to come? This, I think, is not the way. And the process he described here, very subtle in the first stage. And he speaks about this very nice thing. I think everybody of us has experienced it, or is experienced it again and again. What he calls the first love. Again, that what is it that Chekhov always comes back with his love? Every time he comes back to love. Not that he speaks in every page about love, 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 but it is in each page the central point. And now the first love is when I meet a play, when I meet a character, when I meet an idea of my colleagues, let's do something together, even we don't know what it should be. When I say to my colleague, okay, let's meet again for an improvisation session, we have no idea what we want to do. In this way, we set first a physical point, and the physical point, a physical situation, is the part I'll get as a book, is the character I got from outside, or I get invited to join an ensemble, to play with them together, whatever. There's a kind of a physical situation. But out of that, it just the other point needed what goes in the opposite direction. It has to do with the active waiting, with this listening, with a kind of an inner gesture for open up. And in this open up gesture also have a way of concentration to listen what would like to come to me. And in this listening, there is a sensation, and the sensation we can call first love. I think everybody knows how it feels like when you read something and you say, okay, I have to do that. And this listening, this is very much connected with this is the first step. Chekhov calls that music, musician, the musical one, not musical in this term of a musical. It is a musical way. It has to do very much with listening. So that comes together. And the higher ego from the end, the inspiration. And here it's also the higher ego, what is touching the first love and tries to let it float into my listening.
That can become a very concrete springboard for us when we really feel the polarity and the unity of that state of inspiration and that first love. That first love, he says, is so important to cultivate because it's kind of like the water and the sunlight that keeps the plant growing. You know, when the seed appears, you envision the full plant. When you have the seed in your hand, you envision the full plant and you fall in love with that image. And so you love the seed and you love the plant that is in the seed that is unseen yet. But that seed must have light, and it must have some level of attention. And the more love or light, the more love you pour into that seed, the more light it experiences to grow. And he suggests that if we fail to cultivate our love in this, it will be very much like what I want to call a cacophony, that the musicality of the unfolding of the process will fall flat. It will become harsh and dry, and withered even, or it simply will fail to grow. That without this first love, and without nurturing this first love, we're likely to lose our pathway as we go, as the challenges of meeting the full expression of the creation build. The technical needs, the world of place and stuff and time start coming into the process, then our fears start mounting. And the more we can retain or stay connected to the love. So one practical thing that we can do in these early stages is to actively lead ourselves with the question, in what way do we love, and what do we love? Joerg mentioned our ensemble, for example, the people that we work with. Maybe we don't know the project yet, but we know the people and we love working with them. We love the potential of creating something, or we love the script, or we love the opportunity. So there are many different aspects that we can love, and finding, recognizing, and cultivating all the points will create a symphony. Instead of just one solo musical instrument, it will create a symphony of musical and rhythmic inspiration that wants to flow to us. That love will magnetize other people. It will magnetize, it will transform the atmosphere and the spaces that you're working in. And it creates a field of harmony, which is part of this musicality that he talks about. And I think it's a great image to investigate more deeply. And I aim to investigate more deeply in what the relationship is between this music the musicality that he speaks of in this first stage. In Lessons for the Professional Actor, he says, you must imagine yourself developed by the method. And you must imagine the method in your way. So this is like that, if we look at the creative process of being an artist, and we look at this, developing a relationship with this method, falling in love with this method, and feeling the musicality that it brings into yourself. The method is the seed, and you hold the method in your hand and you imagine yourself being fully developed by this. If you were free of your inhibitions and you have a fully developed physical body, mind, spirit, soul, thinking, feeling, willing forces are fully developed, when we hold the image of ourselves fully developed in according to this method, it is then also really important that your creative individuality customize and alter the method, because as Joerg was saying, it's not step, 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 step for every single person. It's not the same flight of stairs. So one of my creative individuality points is that I do like offering procedures. I do like having a step, a step, a step, a step. Some artists are not like that. But when I know, for me, when I know if I take this step and then this step and then this step and then this step, I know that I have that pathway. For me, it's a little bit like plotting out how I'm going to get from Texas to Berlin, right? I'm going to plot that out step by step by step by step by step. But if I have my own airplane, I can actually jump off at any point, and I could actually skip steps, or I could double back to steps. So I find having a procedure is great because it allows me to break away from it and respond to any other point that's calling me, a point that I happen to feel a little more love for. I'm able to jump off into it and allow it to take me as far as it can get me. And if I need to, I can come back to the sequence.
I just go to that little point because that's, of course, the quality of creativity. It is unlogically, and you need to become logically to become unlogically, or with other words, it is very individual on one hand. On the other hand, there are some general understandings to work in this creativity. And in the creative process, we meet always a kind of contradictions. So all the tools are woven in one another, but I can't do all the tools at the same time. I only can start with one. The creative process can start from different surroundings of me, from different starting points. When I really go to the direct process, but on the other hand, there is everything in it. I have to do step by step. I can't do other. But on the other hand, I have to have this openness to understand and to know what are the other possibilities. And of course, one step is in the beginning, and maybe we speak later on about such a staircase with some springboards on it. It's a double staircase. One staircase is a step-by-step staircase, and then there is a bit on the second side of it is a staircase, what makes, the jumps, step, step, step. And here I have that, I jump here and then I jump back, step, step, step. I jump there, step, 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 and jump back to the first stage. So it's this combination is in the practical process what we see. And the point what has to do with the creative process, when we want to develop this artistic quality in us, is also with Chekhov so interesting that he speaks about that through the skill, through the technique itself, we will not only develop our art in this way, we also develop ourselves. And this is what you described with this, I have to imagine myself as this creative actor. And in which exercise is Chekhov giving that as a tool for the actor itself? It's very interesting. He speaks, when he speaks about how to work with the objective for a character. Yeah, he gives there some suggestions, but one central suggestion is imagine the objective of the character, imagine it as fulfilled. Imagine the objective of the character fulfilled, and then you know as actor what the objective is. This is in your sphere, let's say sphere, of the image of your character, that you see the image, how the objective for the character is fulfilled. And this gives you as actor also some inspirations. So the same tool the actor can work with for herself, for himself. Imagine that's my objective as artist. I want radiate something to the people who see me. I want that they get inspired also by that for themselves. So I have to imagine this. I am a creative artist. And how does it look like? And it doesn't mean any selfishness, doesn't mean any egoistical saying I'm great or something. No, it's a very hard to imagine such things as a quality. How can I imagine it? What do I mean with that? How does it look like? What is this imagination? Because this imagination is not anymore a picture, or never the picture I get a very good prize. I see myself on stage getting a prize. This is not the imagination of can I imagine as a creative artist. So that's something to that, and maybe we can give it to Ophir. Maybe he has collected some questions to us to bring some structure to our talk.
No, I just wanted to ask, is there, because I'm reading in a few, from what you're saying, there are a few resources for this, and is there a definite list, and what is it by Chekhov? I don't think that we said it, or I missed it.
Okay.
What are the 4 stages?
Okay, so I'll go through that. So the actual, it's quite quite simply and clearly listed, summarized right at the end of that chapter. And as I noted, I was like no reason to try to rephrase what he stated so clearly. That first stage, where that first love is filled with a sense of anticipation, the general atmosphere of the work, of the process, everything comes in. We get a musical perception of the feeling of the whole, We get our first flashes of images, and it's a period of time where we do many, many readings of the play, many solitary readings, just reading to yourself for the whole play, not yet for the character, just for the whole play. In the second stage, it's the conscious elaboration of the images, and it's where you now really start working with the ensemble. You read the play as the ensemble with the aim of retaining all these images that came to you in your solitary readings, and then the director leads you with questions, and this idea of leading, the director leading you with questions. When you're by yourself, then you have your director self that leads your actor with various questions about what is the idea of the play. That's meaning, what is being said in this play. You picturing the audience and what the audience will experience when you are when you're done, when you're finished. What will the audience experience? So you start looking at, that's the looking for the super objective of the play that lies in its impact with what the audience will receive. And we must envision ourselves as the audience and look at the perspective of the artistic work from the audience's point of view in order to find the true super objective of the work. We look at the general atmospheres, the style, what are the forces of good and evil, and again, looking at the feeling of the whole. These might be some of the leading questions that the director brings forward, or your inner director asks you if you're working by yourself. In the third stage, the third stage is incorporation, and that is that begins, again, as he says, everything starts to overlap and feed in one into the other. That incorporation means to input, to put into the corpus, to put into the body. And that is where we begin with the blocking, with the elements of characterization. He suggests, many ways in, but one of them is having the actor write out all their activities, a list of activities that they do, and then they begin moving. So the leading questions come in. How does the character walk? How does the character move? How does the character engage in this particular quality or that particular emotional realm? How does the character move in this atmosphere versus that atmosphere? And so just beginning to get it up on its feet and then fully into production, into full rehearsal. And he has many suggestions for the incorporation process, including working out of sequence, including selecting grounds for each rehearsal. And grounds is a word that George Stanoff, who to the actor is dedicated, was one of my teachers, and George used the word grounds all the time. That was his primary. Every time we rehearsed a scene, he said, these are the grounds that you're working with. You're using atmosphere as your ground. You're using centers or imaginary body as your ground. And so Mr. Chekhov suggests we select a ground for each rehearsal, and that we have rhythmically interspersed rehearsals completely free of any grounds whatsoever, and touching back regularly on the feeling of the whole. So, and then the fourth stage is the stage of inspiration. And so anticipation, or the musical falling in love, conscious elaboration of the images, incorporating the images, and then achieving that state of inspiration are the 4 steps that are outlined in On the Technique of Acting.
Almost the same as he writes it in the lessons, not writes, he says it in the lessons for the professional actor. So he writes in his, I don't know if the writing here is word by word, but 1, atmosphere, 2, imagination, 3, incorporation, and 4, inspiration. So it's almost the same, but 1 and 2, it's yeah, something a bit different.
And one of the other things he says in Lessons for the Professional Actor is he talks about the creative process as a whole being one of turning the outer life and outer things into an inner life, and the inner life into outer events. And that, I think, is a great goal for, what is the creative process. One of the things he has in there is he has in Lessons for the Professional Actor, he recommends a sequence where he says he comes in, his start point for incorporation is atmosphere, and then gesture with qualities, and then characterization. And the reason that he suggests it in this order goes back to that need to continuously sustain the feeling of the whole. And the actor's tendency is to go to their character and to start getting so excited and falling so in love with their character that the development of the character starts to deviate or break away from or grow in a way that is very creative perhaps for the character, but independent of the feeling of the whole, the story that must be told, the experience of the audience as a whole. So by really getting us as an ensemble deeply connected to the whole realm, the score, he talks about having a score of atmospheres, it's a sequence of atmospheres that travel through the whole play, that by being in touch with this score of atmospheres, that we get the feeling of the whole most centered, most deeply, and then by moving to the concept of gestures, including the ensemble's gesture in relation to the play, in relation to the audience, that we get connected with the storyline that must be told. And after that, then we move into the specific elements of characterization, which will have already been forming, of course. But by doing it in this order, he suggests that our lower ego will remain in balance and in check and will not get overweighted. I had an actor once who I was mentoring very closely through a performance that he was doing, and he was so excited he brought me the video of the show, which happened when I was out of town, so I couldn't see it. And he had done, so much work on the chart, and his performance was so specific and clear and continuous and very, very creative. But he had a period of time where he was on the stage for about 15 minutes with no dialogue. And as he was showing me the video, he realized that he was distracting. He was so engaged and so creative and so interesting that he was distracting from the play. And I saw this flush of excitement turn into shame, because he realized, he had been so proud of what he had done, and he realized he completely lost focus of the whole. And of course, I, applauded his awareness now, because I saw that, and and I was, unsure as a teacher how to help him see it without crushing, the vulnerable artist within, and that he saw it. Then my task became to support him, to celebrate his lesson, his learning, that he saw it, how great, and that he did it, and now he can see, and he will know that lesson forever now, because he saw it. And so I could appreciate that he developed all this skill with the technique, and he lost sight of the feeling of the whole.
Nice story. I think we know that very much when we have taken something very new in us, and when we start to manage some new things to handle, then we come to the point that we do too much with it and lose what we have known before. It's not only in the art, it's also in the practical world sometimes, to work with other tools. And then we have to find back the relationship to see the full thing. Yeah. This, when we come to that, the 4 stages, they are very, very much interesting in this way, as you have touched it, that it is actor-director. And for the directing, that means also for the work with others, there are some wonderful suggestions, even in small sentences, wonderful detailed suggestions for an awareness of it. And on the other side, it is when one is working alone with oneself, one is, as you said, the director for oneself. So I need just to start with a divided consciousness when I do the first step, because I'm my director. And how can I lead myself through that steps, stepping in, stepping out, or stepping beside and being with me? And there are also these moments when he speaks about the director. This is an interesting thing, to do the game, let's say a game, or the playing with yourself, giving you a suggestion, say, oh, I have to prove it. Okay, let's see, how does it work? Oh no, give me another suggestion. So that one also free from that, what very easily happens when one works alone. I go in one direction, and then I want to do it better. I want to make it much better. And then I get stuck in the end in something. And always this not logical work, what he suggests with his 4 steps. There are 4 steps, but they are wonderful unlogically on one point. And they are not asking in the very first moment, how can I act this most important moment of this character in the right way? No, it's just more, as he described in these steps, from the sphere, from the outside, step by step, it comes closer to me. And then in the end, then I know in this transformation, with the help of the creative higher ego, or whatever you name it, then I will know how it works. But I need first all that things around me. This is really a wonderful summary also, what he gives with the 4 stages of his technique. A kind of an overview, but even unlogically. That's a great thing to see. How can I relate to it in a creative way? And I think we can go then to some more details and maybe also in some practical suggestions with a next meeting to step deeper into some details what we have now looked at as a more overview about that theme, the creative process in 4 stages, or how many steps you would like to do.
Yes, and maybe you next time can share a little bit of some of the differences from some of the different translations of the materials with that. And I think you had a question you said you had for me, and I didn't know if you remember it or...
It's not for now.
Not for now. It's for
no,
later.
maybe it comes back for the next meeting.
Just before we wrap it up, I did want to see if there's anybody else out there who had, Ophir, you have a question, or someone has a, yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if there is one step that you feel that is not well treated or not well developed in nowadays of the theater world, of the creation, you know, of plays. Is there something that you see that he writes about that is not there in art today, in general?
Well, my answer for that is that the single greatest flaw in general for theater is the failure to embrace the atmosphere, to give priority to atmosphere as the soul of the story. Without the atmosphere unites. It's the first thing that impacts the audience. It's they experience it with first exposure to the work, whether it's a commercial, if it's a flyer, if it's someone verbally speaking. It is an expression of the atmosphere that they are actually conveying. And the atmosphere is what lingers most fully in the audience for years and years and years afterwards. It permeates their soul. So lack of atmosphere to me is the largest failure. And for me, that begins in stage 1. For me, it's we fall in love. I fall in love with the atmosphere. If anyone's had a chance to watch the Frankenstein on National Theater Live, or if you got to see Jane Eyre on that, you can feel the atmospheres very, very powerfully. And so, yeah, so that's it for me. The atmosphere, also in relation to the taking a very serious look at what the atmospheric journey of the audience can best be in order to reveal what it is that that you want them to discover. You want every audience to discover something that changes them, and changes them in a way that allows them to take different actions tomorrow because they saw your play today. And in order to impress your spirit upon your work of art strongly enough that it in some way elevates the audience to a higher value of living, that the conscious link to the artistic expression in relation to the spiritual role of theater.
Did I understand you right? You mean from this 4 stages, or from this qualities, speaking about what we miss when we look to our time in theater. I think that's one of the central things, the atmosphere question. When we were going into theater with the groups here in Berlin, sometimes there is an atmosphere, and then the question is, how is this atmosphere created, by which tools, and what kind of atmosphere? I don't mean the quality of the atmosphere itself in this way, but which kind of atmosphere, in which direction does it go? Is it a living atmosphere, or is it a kind of a fixed atmosphere by repeating the soul states of the general situations? So there is, this is a big question, because the atmosphere is the most direct spiritual thing in the performance. Atmosphere is directly, it's in this moment, it is spiritual. It sounds a little bit crazy, but this spiritual things is, of course, in any other layers of the performance, but it is the most direct thing what is just there. And this is a huge thing. And what I also would like to say, what I miss sometimes very much, and is the question of the inner artistic gestures, what leads to the point of the psychological gesture. The artistic gestures, not the emotions, what can happen, and even the emotions or feelings, or other gestures from the thinking about the part which arise, but the inner gesture for the character, what is not the actor's one. This is also what is worth sometimes to look at. And yeah, in general, I wanted to say that, because I understood this question in a different way first, I think this interesting thing is, with these 4 stages, you can work in any art. And this is, I worked with these stages with the people when I worked with Chekhov technique for writing, when I worked with dancers, when I worked with painters or sculptors. All these stages are, of course, sometimes you need to relate it to it, translate a little bit, but they are helpful for any creative process. This is an amazing thing, very interesting.
Yeah, I would like Jörg to ask, can you give an example how do you especially discern the PG from the artistic gesture? I'm not sure if I understood right what you meant with that. What is the artistic gesture for a work or for a role? Is it not the PG, or is it actually the PG?
It is actually the PG.
Ah, okay.
Or other inner gestures, what maybe are not so brought forward, so much brought forward for to the PG itself. Yeah, even a smaller gesture for a moment, like this inner expansion, contraction, or something, in a pause, or such things.
So all kinds of this.
All kinds of that, and on the widest level, that's a psychological gesture.
That process that Mr. Chekhov speaks of, about envisioning your objective fulfilled and understanding trying to find the super objective of a character by discovering the image of the objective fulfilled. What is the gesture of the condition that the character will experience in the full victory state? That's really what they're aiming for. And this, I see people using, for example, gesture, but not giving it any stakes, any polarity, any movement. So it's they're missing what Chekhov talks about, two specific things, is the individual relationship of the character to each other character, how differently it relates. You know, my character relates to person A differently than person B. That this is this changing of relationship, which is based in ultimately whether this person is helping me get to my fulfillment or blocking me. So everyone is either a positive or a negative support, and your gesture, your inner psychological gesture, alters in relationship to each person because they are either helping you or hurting you. And you know that, and sometimes they change. And so finding the gestures for those points, the gesture that expresses what happens when you fail to achieve this, getting those polarities, those gestures connected to you. And this happens a lot, especially if people choose to find a gesture through an archetype. If they take an archetype of a character like the orphan or the healer, and they create a psychological gesture for their character through the archetype, they often fail to embrace the polarity and the, what we might call the shadow side of that archetype. So it's there are a lot of people who are using archetypes to create their psychological gesture, and the gesture is not thriving, it's not pulsing through the play. It's never really just one single form. It speeds up, it slows down, it expands, it contracts. So having that living pulse in the gestures.
Oh, that's a big other theme, Lisa. All this funny thing with a psychological gesture and all these questions what arise with that. So maybe we put it on a list for a later talk.
Okay, yeah. Well, I want to thank everyone very much for joining us today. We will come back next week. This earlier time, when we started an hour earlier today, so we'll do that again. And we'll continue looking at this creative process. And if you have questions you'd like us to consider, please reach out, send them to Joerg or to myself or Ophir, and we shall go from there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for joining.